So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you to think about your employees. Stack rank your employees and think about placing them in the following buckets. You might have top performers, maybe the top 20%. You could have the bottom 20%, and then the fat middle at about 60%. How much more productive are the top performers than the bottom performers? If your organization is like most organizations, it's going to look something like this, where the top 20% of your employees are driving 80% of the revenue or 80% of the profits, and everybody else is driving only about 20% of the profits. So maybe the top performers just know more stuff. And for some reason, the other employees, the lower performing employees, they're just unable to glean that. So what we want to think about is how can we elevate the productivity of the bottom 80% and bring them closer to those top performers? And in a perfect world, everyone could be performing at the same level. So we try to come up with possible mild interventions to see if we can actually promote employees helping one another out. So peer-to-peer learnings or knowledge transfers. So for 4 weeks at this organization, I took about 660 employees and I randomly paired them up into partnerships. And now I'm trying to measure how well do you and your partner perform relative to your historic performance level. Another intervention was to provide incentives. So I said, look, if you and your partner perform well this week, if you beat out 2 other teams, we're going to provide you with prizes. The one that I'm most interested in is the one I'm going to call lunches. So here I asked each member of those partnerships to fill out a worksheet on Monday or Tuesday. And on the front side of that worksheet, it asked very basic questions. What was your best call so far this week? Why was it the best call? What was the worst call? What could you possibly have done to have not made that a bad call, to have actually converted that sale? Now on the back side of that worksheet, it was basically the same questions, but that was for you to interview your partner. We wanted them to talk about stuff that might help their individual productivities. Now, if you and your partner completed your worksheets and had handed them to me by Wednesday, I would buy you and your partner lunch on Thursday or Friday, depending on your schedules. And finally, I did a combined intervention where I gave people both the incentives and the lunches. Now, during the treatment period, we had great lift. The lunch group, on average, we saw an increase of 24% of revenues. For the incentives treatment, so people getting prizes, we saw about 13% lift. And for the combined, we saw about 26% lift. Now, what's way more interesting to me is what happened after I left. We find that the people that received incentives, their performance converged back down to those control groups that were not getting incentives. So in the post period, I have about 20% average lift for people that had lunch and about 22% lift for people that had lunches and incentives. So if I extend that picture to 20 weeks after the experiment, I still see people that had lunch had about 13% lift on average, and those that had lunches and incentives had about 16% lift. So this is an effect that has persisted as long as those employees have stayed at that particular organization. When we double-clicked on the results, we found that most of the lift came from weaker employees that were paired with stronger employees. And it was whenever I paired people from the bottom 50% with people from the top 50%, we saw tremendous revenue lift for those that began weaker. We were able to significantly increase the productivity of the weaker employees. We genuinely believe that learning took place. And so the takeaway from the study was that there is a large capacity for individuals at the exact same level in the organization to help one another. It was not enough to just provide financial incentives for them to help one another. They required slightly more managerial touch, so to speak. The first day that I was on site running this experiment, I had an 18-year-old woman who came up to me. And she said, look, my partner is the shark. The shark is the salesperson who has won Salesperson of the Year for the last 2 years in a row. I never had the opportunity to go ask him questions. And you've just given me permission. You provided the air cover to allow me to engage in these conversations and actually learn from him. And that was exactly what we set out to test, to see if we could actually have stronger employees engage with weaker employees and bring up the overall productivity for the firm.